state your opinions. Stand over there. I'm going to stand you're behind whom? You stand by me. I just love seeing the looming presence. Yes. We can see so much of these guys. I just love the phrenology.
Next to the nominations of individuals to serve on the courts of our land, which are often lifetime appointments, this appointment of the head of the FBI is one of the most serious that the Senate Judiciary Committee should consider. We decided 50 years ago to depoliticize the FBI by giving 10-year tenures to those who headed up the FBI to transcend any single administration or any single president. So that's one of the most important things that distinguishes this nomination from others. Secondly, we have an individual in Kash Patel who has published a book which in detail describes his view of politics in America. It is a book that is filled with grievances, filled with conspiracy theories, and filled with information of how he sided with the January 6 rioters against the police in this very Capitol complex. And so when he came to testify before the committee, we had some questions that he was asked and he needed to answer about his conduct. And we went through them, particularly on the element of the J6 choir. I know this sounds like a curious thing to spend any time on, but it's a reflection on his priorities and the fact that he's asking to head up the most important single law enforcement agency in the United States at a time when he sided with the so-called political prisoners of January 6th instead of the brave men and women who risked their lives to protect us here in the Capitol complex. He created this musical undertaking and was proudly proclaiming it to Steve Bannon, how the hard work he went to master and digitize it and create a musical work that can be played at the Trump rallies. When we asked him about him in the committee, he couldn't remember any part of it, didn't know who the singers were, wasn't sure what I was talking about. That kind of evasion betrays the fact that he sided with the prisoners when he should have sided with the police. And that, I think, is something that's going to haunt him as he pursues this position with the FBI. I then asked him about a fellow named Stu Peters. I don't know Mr. Peters, but he supposedly is a neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic person, political theorist, who has some sort of a podcast. Well, it turned out that Mr. Patel couldn't remember Stu Peters. Stu Peters, who would he be? Well, he appeared on his podcast 8 different occasions. 8 different occasions, couldn't remember him when I asked about him. You know, I have to question whether or not this man is really ready to take over this job and to guide these men and women who dedicate their lives to the safety of the United States. Something has happened since his testimony, of course, and that is the beginning of the Trump administration and their approach to the Department of Justice. Whether it's the Department of Justice or the FBI, they are now in the process of trying to rewrite history. They want January 6th to turn out to be a much different event, a whitewashed event in history, as opposed to the terrible embarrassment and disgrace that it was that day. And so they're going through the personnel of those 2 departments, Department of Justice and the FBI, and asking which individuals were involved in the January 6th case, as well as other prosecutions that might have involved the president. Sadly, we think that this is a portent of what's to come, where these people will be punished or even dismissed because of their involvement. That is an outrage, that these men and women who work for the Department of Justice being asked to be part of one of the largest criminal prosecutions in our history now would lose their jobs over it or somehow be stigmatized is just plain wrong. But it's an indication of what has happened with this Trump administration kicking off their idea of justice. I won't go through the long list of changes made yesterday by the new Attorney General, Ms. Bondi. We can address those at another time. But I want to give my colleague, all my colleagues, starting with Senator Whitehouse, an opportunity to address the issues that I've raised and their own concerns. I was glad that Senator Whitehouse raised the issue this morning about the fact that Kash Patel may turn out to be the first FBI nominee in history to have pled the Fifth Amendment to avoid criminal prosecution. But in more detail, let me recognize Sheldon.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. 2 quick things, one on judgment and one on candor. Some clown posted a video of Kash Patel chainsawing the heads off people who were on his enemies list in his book. You can't really blame Patel for that. The world is full of creepy people who might do things like that, except for the fact that Kash Patel himself reposted that imagery to his Truth Social account. He now owns that. Setting aside how grotesque that is, the idea that a man with the kind of judgment that he thinks it's okay to repost imagery of himself chainsawing his political enemies, not appropriate for an FBI director. And in terms of candor, we asked him repeatedly about what he testified to in the grand jury. It is basic black-letter law that a witness can walk out of the grand jury and tell the entire world what they said, but he wouldn't tell this committee what he said. He pretended there was a seal order. There is no record or evidence of any seal order. So a second piece of candor may be that he's lying about a seal order. And last, as Chairman Durbin just mentioned, he pled the fifth. Well, everybody's got the right to plead the fifth. But pleading the fifth means you perceive a substantial and real risk of criminal prosecution. Somebody who has faced a substantial and real risk of criminal prosecution ought to have some explaining to do before they become the head of the FBI. And we've been provided none of that information, which sets, as I've pointed out, a novel precedent for this committee that somebody can testify in the grand jury, refuse to disclose it to us, take the fifth, refuse to disclose to it what that substantial and real risk was, and it's okay with the committee to not look into those things. That, to me, is the astonishing part of where we are, and I will turn now to Senator Klobuchar.
Right. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Thank you, Senator Durbin. I come out of a background as a prosecutor, and for years, I'm still proud of that work that we did, but we worked with federal law enforcement. And that nonpartisan, independent nature of the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI is really key to all the work and the belief in our justice system. And I am shocked that our Republican colleagues have not signified any concern about this nominee. A nominee, in addition to the arguments made by my colleagues, a nominee who said that he should close down the FBI headquarters where they do all the terrorism and they coordinate the cyber investigations. A nominee who repeatedly said, including in his hearing, that the FBI is corrupt. I pointed out to him is that during the previous director's time period, Christopher Wray, a director appointed by Donald Trump, the applications to the FBI went up threefold. To me, that shows that people view the agency with integrity. Do they agree with every prosecution ever made? Of course not. Are mistakes made? Yes. But the point is that Christopher Wray worked very hard to restore the morale and to bring that agency out into the fields to do good work. And to have an FBI nominee, think about this, who is repeatedly calling the people that he is supposed to be managing corrupt is beyond belief. At his committee hearing, Mr. Patel said all FBI employees will be protected against political retribution. We said, great, okay. Yet just hours later, the administration forced out 8 of the Bureau's most senior career, let's say that again, career public servants who serve in nonpartisan roles. One day later, an email was sent to FBI employees requesting a list of everyone who had worked on January 6 cases, quote, to determine whether any additional personnel actions are necessary, end quote. So you just get assigned to a case. You're a brand new agent, or maybe you've been there and you have a specialty working on certain types of cases. You get assigned and now you're on this list. Seems a little bit reminiscent to the list that Kash Patel has at the end of his book. This could sweep up and will sweep up agents that are just doing their jobs. The FBI director's loyalty must be to the American people, to the Constitution, and to the rule of law. But Mr. Patel has made it clear that his loyalty is to the president. He has threatened to come after, those are his words, in the past, the president's critics, not just in government, but in the media. In the hearing, I gave Mr. Patel an opportunity to walk back that threat. He chose not to, nor did he try to explain his so-called deep state list of former government officials, including the former Republican Attorney General appointed by Donald Trump. He has accused the heroic men and women of the Capitol Police who defended our democracy on January 6th without evidence as lying and called for them to be investigated. One by one, we went through these allegations with him at his hearing. He could deny none of them. And I look to our Republican colleagues and say, when is enough enough? FBI, fidelity, bravery, integrity. The men and women of the FBI deserve better than this nominee, and I ask our Republican colleagues to stand up and say it too. And with that, I turn it over to Mr. Christopher Coons.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Kash Patel has no business being the director of the FBI. He may have said some reassuring things in his confirmation hearing. I don't think so, but some of our Republican colleagues think so. But a long history of public statements of what he wrote, of what he said in interviews and at rallies and in his book showed a sharply different approach and view about the FBI. In the confirmation hearing, I asked him 3 simple, direct questions about whether or not, as FBI director, he would continue a decades-long tradition of being independent. Political independence of the FBI is critical because it is the most powerful, most important federal law enforcement agency involved in investigating crimes and keeping the American people safe. I asked him if he understood who the FBI works for. And he answered, essentially, through the Department of Justice, the White House. I gave him another chance to answer not who they report to, but who they work for. And he said again, the White House. And I said, Mr. Patel, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General now, answered correctly that you work for the American people and the Constitution, not the White House. I asked if he would refuse a direct order from the president to do something inappropriate, immoral, or illegal, and he would not answer. I asked if he would follow the precedent of Director Wray and others who, when I asked the exact question, if given a direct order to do something unethical or illegal, would you resign? He declined to answer. As you've heard from my colleagues, the motto of the FBI is fidelity, bravery, and integrity. The brave men and women of the FBI, the people of law enforcement, the Capitol Police who protected us on January 6th, the men and women of law enforcement across the country who work to keep the American people safe, deserve, for a 10-year appointment, an FBI director who is a trustworthy partner, who will follow that motto and who will uphold the best traditions of the FBI. Kash Patel is not that man and does not deserve our support. Thank you. And I hand this now to Senator Mazie Hirono.
Thank you. It's just awesome what's happening to both the DOJ and the FBI. You've heard us talking about how important the independence of these agencies are to the safety of our country. And if we cannot trust the people who are leading the DOJ, for example, the highest ranking law enforcement officer in our country, the FBI that has all the levers and tools to investigate and go after people who are potentially harmful to our country, if we can't rely on these people to keep us safe, then we are in very deep trouble. And as you've heard from my colleagues, there are literally thousands of potential people who are working at the DOJ who worked on potentially the January 6th investigations who could be fired. What is going on? I remember asking Chris Wray, the FBI is supposed to be caring about domestic terrorism and keeping us safe domestically. I asked him, how many people, lone wolves, for example, is the FBI keeping track of? And he said, hundreds in every state. So I'd like to have an FBI director who cares about that as opposed to looking inward, which is exactly what the DOJ and FBI is doing. The kind of firing that's going on is, we should all ask, what is going on? What is going on? These are scary times. And then to find out, they talk about, oh, we're so concerned about the FBI and the DOJ having been weaponized during the Biden years. If anybody is weaponizing these two agencies, it's the people who are about to take over. And I note that the Pam Bondi, she just created a weaponizing task force. What the heck is that? Except, once again, turning inward and looking at the people, the brave people who are working in the DOJ and FBI, and looking at them saying, are you next? These are crazy times. I now turn to my colleague, Alex Padilla.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. In addition to a lot of the specific concerns about Kash Patel and how he would be as an FBI director, I feel compelled to remind us of the moment that we are in right now. In the first few weeks of the second Trump administration, the chaos that has been created. We've seen efforts by the administration to unlawfully freeze federal funding, threatening payments to housing programs, Social Security, Medicare, beyond, etc. We have seen unprecedented access by the world's richest man, enabled by the richest president in history, to access the Treasury Department's databases, threatening not just payments, but putting at risk everybody in America's personal information. In times of chaos and crisis like this, the public deserves to see trusted leaders in the most important positions of our federal government. Trusted leaders who will stand up and say no to a president trying to blow through the very guardrails put in place by the Constitution. So it's in that context that makes the nomination and potential confirmation of Kash Patel even more alarming. Judgment, you've heard about that before. As we heard during the confirmation hearing, and yes, I asked about questions of his judgment in prior service. Willing to put the safety of military personnel at risk by giving false information during a hostage rescue operation. That's the kind of judgment you want at the FBI? I don't think so. Lack of preparation. When I asked him about his thoughts on what should be common sense gun safety policies and protocols, what his position was on things like universal background checks, either failed to answer, chose not to answer. Poor judgment, clear lack of preparation